Felix's favourite song at the moment is The Robots by Kraftwerk.
Oh, nice.
I'm like, where?
Well, you. Don't be like, where'd you get that from?
I know, he got it from me. It's because he loves listening to the like vocoder style robot voices. And I'm like, okay. So just in the shower, it's like, we are the robots. Bam, 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 bam. I'm like, oh my God, what am I doing?
That's good. You found a way to share your interest with him.
Great. And then he's going to go to school and he's going to go, oh, do you guys like Kraftwerk?
Kraftwerk all round.
Probably because he went to kids and said, you want to listen to Kraftwerk? Like, no, fine, I'll just go and do some painting by myself.
Go do my own Kraftwerk.
Yeah.
Hello and welcome to the Integration Station. My name is Eleanor. I'm a child and adolescent occupational therapist, and with me today is my co-host, Michael. Hello, Michael.
I'm also a child and adolescent occupational therapist. So thank you for having me on the show, Eleanor.
You're welcome. It's nice to have you.
So each week we'll be discussing how we can support the young people in our lives. We use a Q&A format. And for those regular listeners, they probably know, we get your questions. We sometimes throw in some of our own, and hopefully find the fun in learning how to support the young people that we see on a day-to-day basis and their families too.
Like PD in your pocket, as I always say.
Yeah. I think we mentioned that a few weeks ago.
Yeah, I stole that from you.
But I got it from Eli, our producer, who's behind the camera there. Got a few questions today. We've got a couple of things. There's some stuff on ASI and ADHD, and also an interesting question around strategies and how to support children who are lying or being deceitful. Like we're not behavioural psychologists. We're not in the psychology field at all. But I mean, we do have clients who can lie or be deceitful or try and I guess work things their way, if you will. So, certainly a topic that we can discuss or at least provide a bit of insight on from maybe a sensory basis as well.
Yep.
Might be components there that we can talk about.
But first,
Therapy activity of the week.
Therapy activity of the week. Had a game with one of my young men. He wanted to do like a basketball game. And I think I mentioned a few weeks ago about this basketball game where I had almost like the Hercules style, the obstacles and how you can replicate it. This one's far more replicatable, easier. And I had different coloured cones. So it's like four different coloured cones, and I had different coloured like sashes, like touch football sort of sash. Yeah. That sort of thing.
I can picture that.
Had those on the ground, and the colours of the sash were the same as the colours of the cones, but I mixed around the sashes. So say you had a white cone, I had a green sash on there. And the game essentially was you start from a point and you had to sprint to each cone to pick up the sash and put it back on the correct coloured cone. And then you had to do all that in a time limit and then go to the middle and then shoot the goal.
Right.
And for him, it was more of a fitness,
endurance.
Endurance, but also a sequencing thing. So I gave him the whole sequence. I want the red, yellow, green, blue, like that order of the sashes.
Yeah.
And then you know where they go. But we did that 4 or 5 times and it was really hard.
Yeah.
It was really hard to remember. So in the middle of doing it, you had to come back to the start and then go to the sash and then back to the start and go to the next one. And just in the middle of doing those things, and I think we've talked about in a previous episode, when you're doing sequencing stuff, all well and good to just remember a sequence. Say like a number, say remember 4, 5, 6, 7. You go, 4, 5, 6, 7, repeat it straight back.
Yeah.
But when you're in the middle of actually physically doing things,
for sure.
the body taking over and having to manage different competing demands, and then he didn't get any shots in because he spent so much time like really focusing on trying to get the sequence that his mind was just so, man, now I have to actually shoot.
Yeah.
And it was a really good observation of how much energy and effort it takes to complete something like that.
Yeah.
And that's, I think about that from what's a real world perspective, like, get all the things ready to pack your bag in the morning.
Yeah.
You got to rush out, you got 30 seconds, get everything ready, boom, 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 boom. And then how often do parents go, and they just forget to take everything and they leave everything. And I'm like, okay, yeah. Like there's a lot there to have to process and remember. And as soon as you put a time limit in there, man, that pressure just cranks up a notch.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so the good thing about my young man is that he was really open to doing this and was like, this is like,
great.
Yep, do it. Like could see that it was really challenging, but it's like, no, I want to keep going. I want to keep trying it. And we just modified and adapted. And he had success towards the end, but it was through a combination of repetition and just giving little strategies in between to go, how can we remember the sequence, or how can we pause before we shoot to give ourselves the breathing time that we need to be in the moment.
Yeah.
That was mine. That was my Monday activity.
That was really good. I love that for like an executive functioning, sequencing, but also that movement. I think that great combination of how we can build on those organisational skills, being a really fun and play-based, motivating environment.
Yeah.
That's cool. I might.
It was either
I have
that
to use that one.
It was either that or the beep test. I said, we can do the beep test if you want, or we can do that. He's like, I think I'll go with that one. I'm like, great.
Absolutely not choosing the beep test. That's so fair.
Oh, gosh. How about yourself? Eleanor, what have you got?
I had some great group games this week. So, you and I both actually work in a collaborative therapy space where there's other young people, other therapists also working in that environment. So you can do your own thing, but it also means that if there's maybe those social goals or like building confidence within that, there's opportunities to connect with similar age, like-minded peers, which is really awesome. We had quite a few games going this week, which was great. And one of them, just classic camouflage, which is
not my favourite.
Not your favourite?
No. But anyway, continue.
Is there a reason? It's just because it was like
Explain
game of the year and...
You can explain the game.
Okay.
It's good. Lots of people like it.
I just hadn't played it for a long time and I just got very excited when someone suggested it. My client was up for it. I'm like, yes, I do feel like playing camouflage. But essentially you've got one person in a space in the centre of wherever you're playing. So in the therapy environment, we have... like a ball pit or somewhere that the person who's it can position themselves. And it's like a fast-paced hide-and-seek game. So you might have obstacles or other things set up around the room that people can hide behind. Everyone starts in the middle. The person in the centre will call out camouflage to indicate the start of a round. Then everyone has to break from that central point to a hiding spot and stay there, whilst the person in the middle counts down from a certain amount of time. So 15 seconds is often where we start. They'll look around the room. They can't leave from their position in the middle. If they see someone, they'll call them out and get them, they're out of the game. Maybe they come and help count in future rounds. But if they can't see anyone, they'll start another round by yelling camouflage. But this time the round is 14 seconds and you work your way down each time. Now, as the person in the middle closes their eyes and counts backwards, everyone else comes out of their hiding spots to touch the point in the middle before finding a different spot again. So it's like quick thinking, quick problem solving, that body awareness piece, but also the social elements of, am I mindful of how others are moving? Can I manage my own impulses in navigating those spaces? Can I make safe choices for myself and for others? As well as a bit around that win-loss aspects too. Quite often while we're like, oh, you can come and help me count in the middle. So everyone still has things to do, even if they're out. And it's just a really great, fun way to be moving and interacting and, great social game. Not your favourite, though?
No, I don't like it. No, that's all right.
Is there a reason you don't like it, or you just like to like different things, like yacht rock?
Don't get back onto yacht rock.
I couldn't know. I'm sorry, everyone.
That's all right. That's fine. We can go back there. But I know a lot of people love it, so a good one for a lot of clients. And one you can play at home easy.
So easy.
So...
And then we have our second segment, Reg Strat.
Regulation, the strategy of the week.
Regulation strategy. Do you have anything for this week that you had? I mean, I can start first if you'd like.
I do have a regulation strategy, which is a little bit different to some of the ones that we've done previously. But shaving cream activities. Some young people I can appreciate might manage some tactile sensitivities. I know that we've talked about things like kinetic sand and stuff like that in the past. But I think for those that this does work really well with, it can be so effective and have this really... calming impact. And it's just such an easy one to do. You can do it in your bathroom sink at home or bathroom mirror, something that's just very easy to clean and wipe away.
In the shower?
In the shower. I think, and you can, whether it's just exploring or maybe you're doing like a Pictionary game and bringing in some of those elements into it, just a very calming medium to be involved with. Yeah.
I actually don't really like shaving cream too much. There you go.
Okay.
So I love your ideas.
Yeah.
not meeting my sensory preferences today.
That's okay. Everyone's
fine.
different with that.
Exactly, yeah.
And we should celebrate that.
When everybody suggests shaving cream in sessions, like, can we do shaving cream? I'm like, yep, sure, all right. Just like really working hard to like tolerate that for the period of time.
Do you know what? My friends that love it in session, like really love it. And so we will do like a whole body.
Yeah, right.
So we, and that is great. But obviously, and I do like the functional skills that come with that in terms of cleaning up afterwards.
Great.
So all of my friends know, happy to do shaving cream, but you got to help me pack it up afterwards.
Good.
And it is something that we happy to get as messy as we like, maybe once a block.
That's fine.
We just have some good parameters around that. Yeah.
Actually, one thing with shaving cream I did used to love doing was ice skating.
Oh yeah, that was so
on
good.
the Flying Fox, you hold the trapeze, and as long as you got enough upper limb strength and grip strength, you put the shaving cream on the floor.
Yep.
And then with your feet, you have your shoes off and you run and sort of hold the trapeze and slide along whilst you're holding it. That's actually a bit of fun.
Actually, a bit of a one that I love building that up to is using like a foam wedge at the end of that track. So you have to like run up the foam wedge.
Oh, yeah.
And if you can position yourself at the top, then it's like comes like a ski slope. You can hold onto the trapeze and fly down
a black run.
Yeah, like a black run.
It's fun. Good for our Australian summer, having some ski slopes to go down.
Exactly. Yeah, this is how we make it work.
We went from regulation strategy to activity of the week, but that's okay. That's a segue in itself. Mine was actually white noise.
Oh.
White noise or brown noise. I was actually talking about it with a young man of mine, and we were talking about things that can help with regulating ourselves at night and helping us settle to sleep a bit easier. And I was saying that I have a fan on at night, like the exhaust fan in the kitchen, and it helps my son, and he's got a little white noise machine in his room as well, but it helps just create this feel of noise so you don't get startled by sudden noises.
Yeah.
And we talked about that, and I sort of asked him, is that something you've used before? He's like, yeah, I actually use it to help me get to sleep. I'm like, well, why don't you use it whilst you sleep as well?
Yeah.
You don't have to turn it off just before you go to sleep, because it can be something you can just use throughout the night. And, these days you can have it on your phone. You can have timers that turn off after a particular time, or you can use, fans in the room or a dryer or any. I mean, a dryer could be very costly, but, things that produce that white or brown noise, that can really help calm the mind and reduce the auditory noise that might be coming from an environment and provide quite a predictable
What's the difference between white and brown noise?
The frequency. So the white noise is like a higher frequency.
Okay.
So like
Where
brown noise is more like
you could have that one of those things that like tip over and make a noise when you tip it.
That is another in-joke. But yes, you could have the with the that wasn't a cow. I can't do the cow. Anyway, but
Sorry,
yes.
I put you on the spot again to imitate it.
Not at all. But yeah, the difference between those, and there's I think there's like pink noise, and there's different types of coloured noises.
Right, but the frequency.
But the difference is based on the frequency. And yeah, anyway, so that was a one that as I said, like from my own personal experience, I use. And I remember as a kid, like my mum, I don't know what the electricity bill was like at home, but mum would often have my bedroom upstairs was above the laundry, and the dryer would be on at night sometimes. And sometimes I was
that would be a nice, I can imagine
and I was
that.
like, actually, mum was like always washing clothes and stuff. So maybe it was just on functionally, but at the same time, it provided this really nice brown noise.
But good like strategic incorporation of something that is soothing and regulating for you whilst also doing other things.
Correct. Yeah. So
I'm actually someone that I like to have noise on when I fall asleep. I'll listen to like ambient sleep music.
And that's quite effective. So a lot of people do have difficulty without getting to sleep stuff, but there are sensory strategies for it. We actually had a podcast with Annie O'Connell, this was a few years ago, who was talking about different strategies to support children with sleep, and there's two-part episode to that. So if you go through the back catalogue, you'll find it. But some of the sensory-based strategies, and one of them is using noises, and something like the sound of, like the reason why lullabies work is because of the speed at which the song is going, and it's a slow 60 to 80 heart rate speed.
Yeah,
and
that makes sense.
So again, music and noise itself really effective for regulation.
Yeah.
And, some people listen to different type of music to get to sleep. You might listen to white noise, you might listen to music, you might listen to yacht rock, whatever you wanted to. and it's fine. You can...
Whatever works for you.
Whatever works for you. All right, let's get into some of the questions. So we had a couple of questions come through. One was about research about ASI and ADHD. But I did actually want to start, if it's okay, about... There was a question here that came in, and I just want to be really careful of the wording here.
Yeah.
But the specific question was, any thoughts around kids lying / being deceitful and strategies to help? Now, when I'm saying I want to be careful of the wording, I just want to be careful around lying and deceit because in my mind that suggests like a deliberate intent.
Yes.
And sometimes there is an intent to say something, but particularly for when I'm talking about children, I'm thinking they are still learning a lot of stuff, and the intent is not truly understood.
Yes.
And so there's always a reason. For me, it's the same as how do we, what's the difference between like a sensory and behaviour? And I always come back to there's a reason for every behaviour. No child is doing something deliberately. Well, that's my opinion. Maybe other people might be different. I don't know if you're the same, but my opinion is that no child would do something deliberately. They might see that it works and they keep doing that.
Yes.
But without truly understanding what's going on.
Yes.
But, that's what I guess, coming back to it. So I just want to be really careful because I totally get where this question's coming from and I think it's a good question.
Yeah.
But just being aware of the wording. And I don't know if you have something else you might suggest, like other sort of words for what might be happening there?
Yes, we were actually just chatting a little bit before, weren't we? Because I really agree with what you had said in terms of, I guess, when we've spoken about it a lot, that for behaviour, what we're talking about is something that we're observing and this young person's trying to communicate something with us, and it's that classic example of if you perhaps pick up on that maybe you've asked them a question, they've offered a response, and you're like, but I know that what that perhaps looked like is quite different to what they're choosing to share. And that would make me go, okay, so what's going on for them that they feel that this is a tool that they can access to manage this situation? And I think what were you saying before? Creative
creative avoidance or creative deflection or something like that.
But I think either way, what we're seeing is this young person who's potentially struggling with something, and this is what they feel that they have to navigate that for whatever reason that might be. And I think for us as therapists, but even for parents, caregivers, teachers, those that are involved with that young person's care, it's trying to unpack, well, what's the why behind that? And so it's less around addressing, well, you've said the wrong thing, or I know that's not true, and going, how can I support the other things going on in the background for that? And you're right, you mentioned it before, we are not psychologists or behaviouralists, but I think with our experience in working with young people, and these are things that come up from parents, and OT having a very holistic approach to the things we need to do in our day, I think there is still some capacity here for us to offer some thoughts behind that.
I know when I was looking to this question a bit more, there's obviously, you could Google research about this, but there's a fair bit of research about, I guess, lying, if for want of a better term, and intelligence, or I would say creatively changing a storyline to meet that person's needs and intelligence. And so kids that are bright and have above average IQ are able to think more creatively. And if you think about a fabrication of a story, which is essentially what you might say a lie is, it's fabricating the truth, then you have to have a degree of creativity to come up with something, and you have to be pretty set to know how that's going to go, and to stick by that and have a whole range of ways that you're going to maintain that storyline. And as you said, what's the reason for doing that in the first place? I've plenty of examples. Like even my son, for example, has started to to, to deflect something or to avoid what's happening when you know that, it's clearly him. That's so. For example, it was the other day that that water spilled on the floor. How did that happen? Oh, that was Snoopy. So he's blaming his toy Snoopy. I'm like, okay, so obviously Snoopy, who's an inanimate object, a soft toy, can't do that. But I can see that you're going, okay, there's you embarrassed that it spilled, that you tried to make it work and you didn't have the functional skills to get it to pour that water in. Or is it maybe in the past, the way I've responded to you making a mistake has made you feel as though you have to come up with a different narrative to make it work? And I think that comes down to a whole bunch of reasons as to why children will deflect or avoid and come up with a different narrative.
Yes.
Which might be a better way of saying it. Rather than being lying or deceitful, they're changing the narrative.
Yes. Yes.
Why they have to do that, and I could spend an entire episode talking about those reasons. But as I said, not psychologists who probably delve into that a bit more, but. From a sensory perspective or a sensory motor perspective, this was a really clear example, I think, of I couldn't quite get that skill to work. Yeah. And sometimes I see that in terms of avoiding. So children will come up with really creative ways to avoid going somewhere and doing something. And it's not so much lying or deceit as much as it is avoiding maybe something that's quite challenging. So they might. I don't want to go there and I don't want to play with that kid anymore because he's not being very nice to me, or I don't like playing on that playground anymore because it's really boring. Yeah. And you go, okay, so you've changed the story there. You've actually in inverted commas lied about that. Yeah, yeah. Why are you doing that? And if you get curious and unpack a bit more in a safe way, you could probably get to the root cause of why they're having to change that narrative. Yeah, absolutely. I think this question is actually really well timed because I had one of my young friends who had what turned out had taken something from one of their friends, and the friend had shared that they had lost their item and that people were looking for that. And actually my young friend ended up coming forward and saying to their parent, that's how they sought that out initially, my friends lost their item. I've actually got one that's the same. I'd like to give them my version of this item. Whereas, I think in looking at that, in how that narrative's been changed, I think perhaps recognising that they're wanting to do the right thing and wanting to give that item back, but not being sure how to approach that, and potentially being, I can imagine for that young person like some shame in why they've taken that and acted on that impulse, and that's another part of the story again, but they've tried to do the right thing in coming forward, and I can see how a story like that to support them in doing so would help facilitate that. But you can see that's the why. It's could be easy in that circumstance to really label that they've done the wrong thing, and I know that you said this, but I know this to be the fact, and you can see how that completely shifts how that could look. And I guess from what I understand in managing some of these circumstances, almost separating out the young person and the behaviour. So it's not like we're saying you've done the wrong thing. It's actually, I can see you're wanting to give that back. How can we workshop this together? You are a very kind person in wanting to give that back, and, celebrating the positive things as well, but trying to go, well, how can we work through this together? And in doing so, you're focusing on the positive outcome and going, let's put the what's happened aside for now and go, let's put the what's happened aside for now. Let's try and move forward with how can we come with a more positive outcome here, and then maybe in time go, now that happened, right? And I noticed that happened, and is it something that you really liked, or was it something that such and such has and you feel like you want that? Or and I think a couple of episodes I was talking about sort of pitching a suggestion of maybe what's going on for the person to come back and say no, or for them to go, that's a window into you kind of understand why I'm saying something or doing something. Yeah. And it's just to get curious and to gain further clarity around what's happening. And I only think in these situations, that helps.
Yeah.
Because all it does is it gives that person an opportunity to voice what's going on for them.
Yeah.
And in doing so, you're listening to them.
Yeah.
And in a non-judgmental way, as much as you want to, say if they break something, and I'm thinking of a young child breaking something and blaming someone else for it, and you go, well, clearly the only person here.
Yes,
It's like
yes.
you and no one else. Like Snoopy did not break that thing, right? But obviously there's a reason as to why you're doing that. And if you're spending more time focusing on the own up and, don't lie and own up, then you're kind of reinforcing that could be the initial response to something that's happened. And I guess, yes, at times there are consequences for things, and it's good to be able to take ownership of things that haven't worked out.
Yeah.
But there's a safe way of doing that too.
Yeah, I think being able to, exactly like you said, like being able to talk it through, and, because I guess part of that lack of understanding as well, and perhaps not having that point of what's the right and the wrong thing to do, what's expected and unexpected behaviour. Like there's obviously teaching moments that come from that to support that young person's understanding about what's needed. But I think how we approach that afterwards can be so important.
For self-esteem in particular.
Yeah. And so that we're going, I know that you're a good kid. We can't take things from other people. Is that something that can we talk about that together? Can we chat it through? Can you help me understand? But not doing it in the moment necessarily when you've identified that different narrative, because then quite possibly you're just going to get that wall up, or they'll dig in further, or things might escalate. It's actually going, okay, so for now I'm going to separate you out from what's occurred, but I'll take the opportunity when we're feeling grounded, we're in a safe place, and I'm regulated as well. We often talk about co-regulation, but I can have this in a way that's matter of fact and not necessarily going down that disciplinary and authoritative.
Really
like
heated.
it's can have that in a way that I can still communicate what we need. I know that's really hard. It's actually funny, this topic, I just listened to Pop Culture Parenting, which is one of my favourite podcasts, and they had done an episode what they referred to as bad kids, and they said they've done this as a bit of a plug to bring people in, because that's not the language they use or how they affirm that. But they referenced the movie Stand By Me. Have you listened to this episode?
I don't think I've listened to that specific one, but I know the movie, and I would definitely get that.
How that would link in
Dr.
there.
Billy Garvey's conversations, he's never met a bad kid. He says that all the time. So yes.
And
anyway.
I just, I think the reason I connect so much with that podcast is I feel like that's very much in keeping with our practice as well. But the example that they had referenced was this kid had, in the movie, had taken money from a teacher and had tried to do the right thing in giving it back. And then they'd seen that happen. And actually before anything even happened, they've immediately gone to this kid and gone, have you taken the money? This fits that pattern of behaviour. And you can see how, if that's how we approach those things and we reaffirm that narrative, then we're going, well, what's the point here? People think I've done the wrong thing anyway. And it just feeds into this really vicious cycle. And I think there's an opportunity for us to break through that and to offer a different narrative and to make sure that that's not the defining feature of that young person. And we can see past that.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely.
Like, gosh, must be so hard in that moment in managing that conversation and trying to work through that. And if you're seeing repeated patterns and depending on the heaviness and the extremity of what that looks like. But I think there's a call for all of us to support that young person, to give them the opportunity to make different choices and help them work through that and help them have opportunities to feel valued and connected and things that play into their strengths, rather than constantly being caught out for things like this. Like what are the protective factors that we have in place? What are the things that help them have those chances to be different versions of themselves, and that we're seen as a person, not just this consistent behaviour? Because
that is exactly what it is. People get too often defined by their behaviours and not the person they are. And I certainly subscribe to the belief that there isn't a bad child. There's just situations that have led to the things that have and responses that have happened. So. Yeah.
Actually, just one final thing on that before we go to a little bit more of a research-based conversation. I know something that can be really helpful is something, I guess if we're looking for kind of tools to unpack the why, like your ABC charts, like your antecedents, behavior, consequence. Now, when we're saying consequence, we don't mean you told me this story and now you can't have that thing. What we're referring to actually is, well, what happened following? What was the direct outcome of what had occurred? And the antecedents is obviously looking at, well, what were all the things leading up to that? What happened in that day? What's happening in that young person's life? What's going on around that? Then the behavior, what did I observe? And then what did we see as the intended outcome of that? Whether we're trying to deflect or get away from something, that's really more what we mean by consequence. And then that can help us understand, actually, I can see the steps beforehand.
Yes.
Because if we're just addressing what's happening at that immediately observable point, that's not going to necessarily break that cycle.
Yeah. And I know that's the ABC, the antecedent, behaviour and consequence sort of approach is very much from a behavioural or behaviourist perspective, it's psychology perspective, but it's very relevant. We use it in our OT, particularly for sensory challenges, like, I'm noticing this behaviour, and you go, well, they're in an environment that was extremely overwhelming. Yeah. That's what happened before they came in, or they spent an entire day at school and it was really overwhelming, and the behaviour I'm seeing at home is they're hitting out and lashing out, and I go, well, they were fine at school. How is that happening? Go, well, they were tolerating a lot of school. That's the antecedent. The behaviour is, this is what I'm seeing. And the consequence, whatever from there. So, a good little tool to use as well there. Yeah.
But we did have another question come through around the current research with air sensory integration and ADHD. That sent you on a bit of a dive to...
just a little bit of a look through the internet. Those... people have heard of that before, but the research in that is only going to increase in the next sort of 10 to 15 years. Now, the reason I say that is because probably about 10, 15 years ago, ASI was in the, what epoch was it? In the...
How many years ago did you say?
About 15 years ago. The sort of the what's the one with the research, the implementation maybe, where they're trying to really push research to understanding air sensory integration and the validity and the effectiveness of it. And a lot of it was to do with autism. So a really big push on understanding autism and the effectiveness of autism with sensory integration with autism. I feel as though the next phase would be ADHD.
Broadening that out.
Yeah, ADHD and say sensory integration, for example. And I guess this comes off the back of a greater awareness of neurodivergence in general, but in particular ADHD and understanding ADHD in that that umbrella. And the research is still pretty limited, I'd say, in that respect. But there have been some studies. One was by Shelley Lane. So Dr. Shelley Lane is one of the ASI gurus who did do some research. Hers talked about children with ADHD and over responsivity. So she was talking about being overly responsive to sensory input, or being overactive to sensory input. So for those who are demonstrating that hyperactivity, that sort of makes sense with that over responsivity. And one of the findings was that 54% of children with ADHD exhibit sensory over responsivity, and have greater difficulties processing and modulating sensory input compared to those without ADHD, or I guess a neurotypical or normative population. So, that was one finding. There was, some research that was done with praxis and cognitive impulsivity in ADHD children. So this was done in 2020 to look at relationship between tactile discrimination, praxis, which is things like motor planning and execution of motor plans, and that demonstrated that those with ADHD did exhibit significantly higher levels of impulsivity and lower performance on motor skills or praxis tests compared to the neurotypical group. And I guess that is reflective of difficulties in planning, which ties into one of the key characteristics of something like ADHD, which is difficulties in executive functioning. And so some of the research is very reflective of the experience of a lot of young people with ADHD as well. And so whilst I guess the AIR sensory integration approach is only going to focus on children up to sort of that 12 years of age, there is evidence there's enough evidence there that the way that sensory integration works as in its essence would be supportive for any young person, just generally, but any neurodivergent young person as well, because what it's aiming to do is to integrate the sensory systems and integrate in a way that increases function. Now, I don't know if I'm sure you've had plenty of young people you work with ADHD, and things like ADHD and ASD do come hand in hand. Pretty common. So
I think from like a practical perspective, even just hearing some of that research around that discriminating different touch input and the motor planning abilities and things like that, we certainly do see in the clinic young people with the ADHD that might come through. We'll do an easy assessment with them and try to understand from that sensory motor foundational skill profile what might be compounding upon some things that are trickier for them, which is certainly not unexpected in the context of that neurodevelopmental profile. Yeah. And I think when it comes to that ASI lens and therapy sessions, it's going, well, how can we support and bridge any skill development that we can that's been identified, but knowing that potentially there can be a bit of a ceiling to where OT alone and sensory-based strategies can support, and just understanding that there are some things that young person might navigate as part of that underlying diagnosis. But of course, with any young person that comes through, and this is no exception, that it's understanding where their strengths lie, where those areas of need and support might be, and then targeting what we're doing so they can work towards and maximise their potential. Yeah. So certainly something that is very much in keeping with the therapy approach within ASI.
Yeah. And I guess the research base, and that, I guess this is where it came back to when I was talking about 10, 15 years ago with working with autistic children, is that for ADHD, a lot of the conclusions have been that there needs to be more work done towards this client base, and I think that's where things like autism were a number of years ago, and working with autistic clients. Now it's in a much better, more robust state to say that sensory integration is effective for autistic children. And, my hope is that it would also be the case for children with ADHD as well. But like anything, as you mentioned, it's never just one therapy approach or one strategy. You need to have a team around a child. You need to have different therapeutic inputs. You need to have, formal and informal supports. And that's so important. And I think as we understand more about ADHD, the more we'll understand what can work, and again, it also comes back to what works for that family. Some families might find that they have a child with ADHD that SI has not worked. Yeah. And those that swear by it. Yeah, yeah. And it just comes.
It's got to find out what works for you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What works.
And so I guess when it comes to the current research with ASI and ADHD, there is some out there which we can hopefully link, but it sounds more than anything that there's an opportunity here in this next phase to broaden that understanding and have those really rigorous, robust studies to support that modality in these young people.
Yeah, absolutely. Anybody listening out there wants to do some research into that area?
Hit us up.
Do it. Absolutely. So that's it for this week.
The next week, though, if you want to send anything through, you can do so at podcast@otfcgroup.au, our email address, or you can send us a message through Instagram, OTFC Group. We look forward to hearing questions, things you'd like us to chat through.
And all that stuff.
All that stuff.
Oh, the only other thing I was going to actually add is that we've got some episodes coming up in probably the month of March.
Yep.
I think there's Neurodiversity Week in the middle of March, but I think we might do a bit of a Neurodiversity Month. So might have a bit of info on things neurodivergence and neurodiversity and explaining a bit of that, and got an interview with one of our young staff members here as well, which will be really exciting, about ADHD, and just spend a bit more time understanding the different brains out there and how they make up the world.
How we can help.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sounds good. Thank you, Michael.
All right. Thanks, Eleanor. Did you want
listeners.
To do a shout out to anybody in particular? Or?
Yeah, we can give a little shout out to Fletch. Always likes to listen in. Hope you're doing well, Mr. Negotiator.
Creative negotiator.
Yes, creative negotiation for sure.
Thanks, guys.